Lucky I'm not filming. Sorry? Lucky I'm not filming. I'll drop their legs off completely. Legless. They're too tall. Yeah.
Introducing the officials for Event 6, the men's 3-metre synchro springboard, and Event 5, the women's 10-metre synchro platform. Your referee, Mr. Eric Brooker. Your assistant referee and execution judge number 1, Kevin Hall. Execution 2, Barb Bush. Execution 3, Felix Calderon. Execution 4, Vicky Campbell. Execution 5, Helen Hillard. And Execution 6, Gillian Brooker. Your synchronisation judges, Synchro 1, Valerie Beto. Synchro 2, Kaiting Cheong. Synchro 3, Tony Ko. Synchro 4, Chen An Ping. And Synchro 5, Kim Fain. Our FINA representative, Mr. Steve McFarland. The men in this competition will be performing 6 rounds of dives on the 3-metre springboards, and the ladies will be performing 5 rounds of dives on the 10-metre platform. Our first team is on the boards and ready to go. Commencing round 1. Team number 1 representing China, Bowen Wang and CEG, 401B. Execution scores 8, 8.5, 7.5, 8.5, 9, 8.5. Synchronisation 9, 8.5, 8.5, 9, 8. Team number 2 representing Malaysia, Uzi Liang and Chu Yue, 201B. Execution scores 8, 8.5, 8.5, 7.5, 7.5, 8. Synchronisation 8.5, 8, 8.5, 8.5, 9. Team number 3 representing Singapore, Mark Lee and Timothy Lee, 201B. Execution scores 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7.5, 7.5. Synchronisation, 8, 7.5, 8, 8, 8.5. That completes the round one for the men's 3 metre synchro springboard. We now move to the women's 10 metre synchro platform. Team number 1 representing United States of America. Execution scores: 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7, 6.5, 7. Synchronisation scores: 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 8. Team number 2 representing China, Bingjing Zhai and Yuji Zhai, 101B. Eight and a half, 9, 8.5, 8, 8.5, 8.5. Synchronisation scores: 8.5, 9, 8, 9, 9. Team number 3 representing Malaysia, Lo Zhai and Kimberly Bong Xianping, 401B. Execution scores: 7, 6.5, 6.5, 8, 8, 8.5. Synchronisation: 6, 4.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6. That completes the first round of dives. We now move back to the 3 metre springboard for round 2 of the men's springboard. We've got Bowen Wang and C.E. Zhai, 201B. Execution scores: 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8. Synchronisation: 8, 8, 9, 9, 8.5. Team number 2, Uzi Liang and Chu Yiwei, 301B. Execution scores: 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Synchronisation: 8.5, 7.5, 8, 8, 7.5. Team number 3, Mark Lee and Timothy Lee, 301B. Execution scores 7, 7.5, 8, 7, 7.5, 7.5. Synchronization 8.5, 8, 8, 8, 8.
Let's go, girls.
We now move up to the 10-metre platform. Team number 1, Delaney Schnell and Taryn Gilliland, 301B.
Go, ladies.
Execution scores 5.5, 5, 5.5, 7.5, 7, 7.5. Synchronization scores 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 7. Team number 2, Bingjing Jia and Yuji Jia, 301B. Execution scores 8, 8.5, 8, 7, 8.5, 8.5. Synchronization 8, 8.5, 8, 8.5, 8. Team number 3, Lo Jiayi and Kimberly Bong Jian Ping, 103B. Execution scores 6, 6.5, 5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Synchronization 6.5, 6.5, 7, 7, 5.5. That completes the second round of dives. We move to the 3-metre for round 3. Bowen Wang and Si Yi, 407C. Execution scores 7, 7, 6.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8. Synchronization 8, 8 way, 107B. Executed 7, 6.5, 6.5, 7 scores 8, 7, 8, 8, 8.5. Team number 3, Mark Lee and Timothy Lee. Execution scores 6.5, 7, 7, 6, 6.5. Synchronization 7.5, 6.5, 7.5, 7, 7.5. 10 metre, Delaney Schnell and Taryn Gilliland. 107. Execution scores: 5.5, 6.5, 5, 6, 5.5, 6. Synchronization scores: 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Lo Jia Yi and Kimberly Bong Jian Ping, 201B. Execution scores: 6, 6, 5.5, 6.5, 6, 6. Synchronization: 7.5, 7.5, 7, 7, 7. We now commence round 4. 3 metre, Owen Wang 307C. Execute 6, 8, 7.5. Synchronization 8, 7.5, 8, 7, 6. Uzi Liang and Chu Yi Wei, 407C. Execution scores: 4, 4, 3, 5, 4, 4.5. Synchronization 6, 4.5, 5.5, 4.5, 5.5. Mark Lee and Timothy Lee, 107B. Execution scores: 6, 6, 5.5, 6.5, 5, 5.5. Synchronization scores 7, 7, 6, 6.5, 6.5. 10 metre, Delaney Schnell and Taryn Gilliland, 407C.
Ready?
Execution scores 4.5, 4.5, 4, 4.5, 3.5, 4. Synchronization scores 5.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6, 4.5. Bingjing Shah and Yuji Shah, 207C.
Pretty sure I got it.
Execution scores 4.5, 4, 5, 4.5, 4.5, 5. Synchronization scores 6.5, 7, 5.5, 6, 6. Lo Jia and Kimberly Bong Jian Ping, 301B. Execution scores 7.5, 7, 8, 6.5, 6, 6.5. Synchronization scores 5.5, 6.5, 6, 6, 6. That completes round 4. We now commence round 5, which will also be the final round of execution scores 7, 6.5, 7, 7, 7, 7. Synchronization scores 8, 7.5, 6.5, 7.5, 7.5. 10 metre, Delaney Schnell and Taryn Gilliland, 5253B.
Ready?
Execution scores 5, 6, 4.5, 6, 6, 6.5. Synchronization scores 7, 6.5, 7, 7, 6.5. Bing Jingjia and Yu Jia, 5253B. Execution scores 6, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. Synchronization scores 7, 7, 7, 7, 6. Lo Jia Yi and Kimberly Bong Jian P, 5231D. Six.